Hi there. Welcome to the first lecture for Fox, where I'm going to try to give you a taste for discrete math and computing. Okay, now you should have watched already by now the warm-up, the welcome video, where basically I said that math is for anyone who's willing to put in the effort. So don't say math is not for you. And I'll just make one more point here, which is that math is a peculiar subject. It's just like any running or any sport, you have to train. So you have to do. You don't speed read math. It's not a spectator sport. Okay, so when you're reading through the books, please make sure that you do the pop quizzes. When I say, pause the video and do this, or pause the video and do this. Okay. Lastly, you should have already also watched the administrative stuff video, which goes through the web page. I'll discuss that very shortly today, but I won't be in any detail covering those two videos today. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, what's the plan for today? I'll tell you a little bit about the resources. I'll tell you about the storyline for this course, and then we'll talk a little bit about some background, and I'll present to you an interesting property of sets which you may not be aware of. The main goal for today is to show you how discrete math enters into the world of problem solving. So you have, and in a variety of applications. Okay, so you have an application and you can solve it with discrete math, and I'll show you how discrete math enters. And then we'll invoke some very famous people who have quoted and said that well, first of all, discrete math is fundamentally important to computer science. Point number one. And point number two, okay, that when it comes to getting good at math, effort is needed, patience is needed, perseverance is needed. Okay, I'll end with 3 challenge problems. I'll put my money where my mouth is. Okay, and I will offer $10 for one of the problems. That's an easy one. $100 for another problem, and you should be able to. Someone should be able to win the $100, and $1,000 for an even harder problem, and that is a very hard problem. Probably I've protected myself, but it's an interesting problem for you to think about. Okay, it gets at the heart of what is computing. Okay, so let's begin. So the resources, the web page, you can check out the web page and check out the administrative stuff video. Everything you need to succeed on the course is on the web page. Okay, the textbook is your friend, and if you bought a copy of the textbook, you should have a book that looks something like this. Okay. I highly recommend the book. Short chapters, one for each chapter, sets the schedule for the course. You can read the short chapter, you can understand the short chapter, work through the chapter. Don't speed read, don't be a spectator. Okay. We have the TAs and undergrad mentors, lots of energetic people ready to help you. The recitation section is going to be interesting for the online version of the course, so every homework has some recitation problems, and every week one of the TAs will record themselves working step by step through the problems. So look at the problems ahead of time, try to solve them, or even if you can't solve them, looking at them has a benefit, and then go and see how the TA solves it. Okay, ALAC hopefully will be able to provide some online resources for additional help. Keep in touch with them. Okay, I am always here. I welcome questions. I love it when you send me questions. Okay, I might not answer them immediately. That's not because I don't want to answer them. It's because I have to, I have a string of emails coming in and I answer them one by one. Okay, now prerequisites. They're not just there to provide a barrier to entry to this course so that we can weed out people. No. The prerequisites are there because you really should understand those basics before taking this course if you want to make the best out of this course. So programming up to data structure. So that's 1 year of programming. Calculus 1 is required and Calculus 2 is strongly recommended. So a full year of calculus. Okay, rules. No food. So you're watching the lecture or you're watching a recorded version of it. Don't be chomping on some, food and some crackers and this and that. If you are getting tired, no problem, pause. Okay, pause. Get something to eat, get a coffee, come back. But don't distract yourself while watching. No electronics. You don't need any electronics to do this course. You don't need it. Okay. Now, you might need a laptop to, write up the homeworks because the homeworks have to be typed. Exams have to be typed. And then to upload the homework to submit it, but otherwise no calculators, no calculating aids, nothing like that is necessary. No cheating, and that goes without saying, just don't do it. Okay? So let me tell you about the storyline. This is about discrete math. At the first half of this course, or maybe 2/3 of this course, is about discrete math. Okay, and in particular, to study discrete math, we need to introduce discrete objects, and then we will introduce how you reason about them, basically how you prove things about them. Okay, and one of the things we like to do with discrete objects is to count them, because imagine you have an algorithm, you have written a program that has to, search through all the possible ways of doing something. Well, how long will that algorithm take? Well, it'll take an amount of time that's essentially equal to the number of ways of doing that thing. So you need to be able to count how many ways can you do something. Okay, and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're used to it, but when it comes to counting complex objects, like ways of doing something, we need some tools. Okay, and lastly, we need to sort of acknowledge that we're in the real world. In the real world, random things happen. So you send a packet down the internet, it doesn't always get to the destination. Some of them are dropped randomly. So we need to understand how randomness affects our reasoning about discrete objects and how it affects how maybe algorithms work and so on and so forth in the real world. And then it actually comes back full circle, and then we have realized today that certain algorithms actually inject randomness. So certain algorithms use randomness intricately in the actual algorithm itself. And the algorithm doesn't even go without the randomness. So it relies on randomness. Think about how we break ties at your wireless router, at your Wi-Fi router. So two people try to access, if they both try to access at the same time, they fail. So failure report. They try again, fail. Try again, fail. Try again, fail. So there's only one way to break this try again, fail situation, which is randomly. Okay, so randomness has become an intricate part of both understanding the real world and designing algorithms. So we need to understand randomness. Okay. That constitutes discrete math, or our treatment of discrete math in this course. And we could do a lot more, but we want to save some space and energy for the application of discrete math to the most famous discrete object, okay? So the digital computer. So we want to build a theory of computing. What can we compute? Okay, it's a deep question. And it turns out that we will be shocked by the answer. There are things that we cannot compute. Not only things we cannot compute, many things we cannot compute. So let's focus not on the things we cannot compute, but on what we can compute and what we can compute efficiently. Well, we'll touch on that, okay? But that will be the main topic of the follow-on algorithms course, okay? So, let me now discuss a little bit of background. Hopefully you all are aware of sets. Okay, you've had programming, you've had high school, so numbers, geometry, algebra, calculus, okay, and you've seen sets. Okay, so what's the minimum element in this set that I'm showing here? Okay, well, no brainer, 3. Okay, you just look at the set and you say it's 3. Okay, so let me pose a slightly harder question. What's the minimum element in this set, okay, of positive numbers? And, okay, I don't know, where this set ends, or how many numbers are in this set. All I know is that they're positive numbers, okay? And it could be an infinite set, so it's going on forever. Well, we don't know the minimum, okay? For example, we see 18 here, but is it the minimum? We don't know. But what do we know for sure? We know that the minimum is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 18. Those are the only possibilities for the minimum, and it has to be one of them. And this is the case for any set of positive numbers. As long as it's non-empty, it must have a minimum. Okay? For example, if you look at the first element in any set of positive numbers, that gives you an upper bound on the minimum. So any set of positive numbers must have a minimum. That's a fundamental property of sets, and we're going to not focus on it now, but we will appeal to it heavily later. Okay, so today I want to give you a flavor for discrete math, so I'm going to move to the board so that, we're going to discuss some problems and how discrete math enters, and then, because I'm on the board, it means that, whatever I'm doing is at the speed at which I can write, so you can take notes. So take notes! Okay, so, welcome to the board, and I'm going to be talking about 5 applications / problems that are, in some cases relevant to the real world. In some cases, they're more purely computer science-y problems, like, something that you might find on a programming homework. Okay, they all involve discrete math. So we're going to talk about virus spreading, speed dating, online advertising. Look at the wide array of problems to which discrete math is relevant. Okay, and then I'll introduce you to a domino puzzle and a subset sum. These are going to be, related to the challenge problems that are worth money, so pay attention. Okay, so virus spreading. Now we have COVID, before we had Ebola. Every now and again viruses pop up. So imagine people are squares and they live on a grid. Okay. So I'm going to draw a 7 by 7 grid here. And I'm drawing slowly so you can draw with me. So draw! Take notes! Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it's going to be a 7 by 7 grid. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and the idea is that this you can think of a person as a white square, and let's say this is me. I have 4 neighbors: north, south, east, west. Okay. Now some people are infected, so let me show you who's infected, and I'm gonna shape them in black. Okay, so these guys are infected. Okay, so some people, unfortunately, have gotten infected. It's not a big deal. Hopefully they will recover, and so on and so forth. Okay. So in this particular example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who are infected. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you how this disease spreads. That's called building a model. Okay, so model. Model. Okay. How does the disease spread? Okay. So we know that some people are infected. Okay. And unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. The disease is going to spread. And let us say that if 2 of your neighbors are infected, then you will get infected. So the model is 1. People are squares on a grid. And 2, if 2 of your neighbors, remember your neighbors are north, south, east, or west. If 2 neighbors are infected, then you get infected. Okay, it's a very simple model. Okay, and lots of viruses spread in this way. Okay, now you might not agree with me about this model. Okay, it may not be that people live on a grid, and it may not be that specifically 2 neighbors need to be infected to infect you. Maybe just 1 neighbor needs to be infected. Maybe 3 people around you need to be infected. Okay, so those are details of the model. Okay, and let's not focus on them. Those details should be the sort of the job of the expert in virus spreading. Okay, it's not really the job of the discrete math guy. So we've come up with a reasonably simple model. Okay, and some people are infected. Okay. And if modeling is not our job as discrete mathematicians, then what is our job? What our job is to take a model or come up with a simple model and then ask questions, ask interesting questions. Okay, so ask interesting questions. Okay, so let's say first question, who gets infected? Certainly, the virus a flu pops up every year usually. COVID has popped up. We've had swine flu, we've had, Ebola, we've had MERS, and so on and so forth. Okay, and an important question is, okay, so we know who got infected. Now, who started being infected, and now who else is going to get infected? Okay, so question number 1. Let's see if we can answer it. Well, it turns out that in this simple case we can answer it, but to answer it in more complex models and in general, that's where discrete math comes in. Okay, but let's answer it here, and I'll show you some interesting things. Okay, so does this guy get infected? Well, let's look. This guy has 3 neighbors, none of which are infected. What about this guy? This guy doesn't get infected. He has 4 neighbors, but only 1 is infected. Remember the model? The model says 2 have to be infected. Okay. What about this guy? Yes, look, this guy has 2 infected neighbors, so he's going to get infected. Okay, this guy 2 infected neighbors, he's going to get infected. Okay, this guy, 2 infected neighbors, he's going to get infected. Interesting. Okay, so even though the disease only started with 6 people, now it's spread to 3 more. Is that the end of the story? No, because now that we've got, in addition to the initial black infections, now we've got some new red infections. Now those red infections, together with the already existing black infections, can infect more people. And in fact, this can continue. So let's look now. Okay, go step by step. Okay, let's look at what happens next. Okay, this guy, yes, 2 neighbors infected. Okay, this guy infected. Will now get infected because these 2 are infected. What about this guy? These 2 are infected. Infected. This guy gets infected now. This guy gets infected. This guy gets infected. Okay, pause the video. I challenge you. Before I complete this infection, try to figure out who ultimately gets infected. Okay, so let me go. Unpause. In case you pause the video, here I go. Okay, so this guy gets infected. This guy gets now infected. Okay, and it looks like we've hit a barrier of no infections. But wait, now look at this guy. Okay, 2 neighbors infected. So this guy gets infected. But that's going to infect this guy now, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy. Wow. Okay. And is everyone going to get infected? This red infection is spreading just like a virus spreads through a population. Is everyone going to get infected? Let's see. Well, now, this guy has 2 neighbors infected. Okay, so infected, nope, wrong. This guy gets infected. So now it looks like maybe we've come to the end. Because look, a barrier of no infections. But look at this guy. 2 neighbors are infected. So the infection continues to spread, and now we're getting worried. The whole population is going to get infected. Okay, but look, this guy gets infected. 2 neighbors, this guy. 2 neighbors, this guy. 2 neighbors, this guy. You get the picture. Okay, this guy gets infected. This guy. Now this guy. And now we've hit another barrier of But this time, if you look at any of these uninfected people, you will observe that none of them have 2 neighbors who are infected. So by playing around with this model, okay, we have learned something very interesting. That, okay, we've got a reasonable model of how infection spreads, and this thing has spreaded and spreaded and spreaded and spreaded, and at some point, okay, the thing has petered out. Okay, of its own accord. We didn't have to do, injections or this or that, or vaccines. It just petered out of its own accord. Okay, and this is what, today, if you listen to the news, is something that's called herd immunity. There's not enough, infection around the uninfected people to infect them. Okay, so in some sense the herd has become immune. So this is an interesting example of where it's possible that a bunch of people got infected, 6 out of 49, roughly 11%. Okay, so a bunch of people got infected, but they didn't manage to infect the whole population. Not everyone got infected. Yay! Okay? I mean, not so yay, because look at how many people got infected, but still at least. Okay? So who gets infected? Okay? By playing around, we've come up with something interesting. Okay, now, that playing around, I call tinkering. Okay, when I first showed you the model and when I first showed you the 6 infections, you might look at this and say, okay, interesting, and okay, yeah, obviously everyone's going to get infected, but until you play around with the model, okay, you don't know. So you've got to play around with the model, become familiar with what's going on so that you can start making interesting conclusions that now the public health guy might find useful, and you might say, okay, you know what? Not everyone's going to get infected. Okay. Another interesting question. Okay, now that we have played around with the model, we might say, well, clearly 6 people is not enough. But maybe it's just because of the way in which I arranged the initial 6 infections. Okay, question. Is there a way to arrange 6 initial infections so that everyone gets infected. Okay? Now that may not be obvious. Now you tinkering will be essential. Play around, see if it can be done. Okay, I'll tell you it cannot be done. Okay, so then we might ask, well, if 6 is not enough to infect the whole population, how many is enough? Okay, what's the minimum? What's the minimum initial infections to infect everyone ultimately? Okay, you can see this is a very interesting question to a public health person. You know, 6 is not enough. So if only 6 infections came into this population, in some sense you're safe. Not everyone gets infected. Okay, but how many need to come into this population and boom, it's possible to infect everyone? Well, it turns out, okay, that if you figure it out, you'll find that the number is 7. You can place one more infected person and infect everyone. Okay? But 6 won't do. It's not trivial to prove that 6 won't do. So you might try to think, how can I convince you that 6 won't do? Okay. And lastly, I'll just mention another interesting thing. When we started with the initial infections, we might have asked, supposing I could immunize some people. Let's say I could immunize 3 people. Okay? And I want to stop the spread as much as possible. Who should I immunize? Okay, maybe I should immunize this guy and that guy. That would be 2 infections. Immunize, immunize, immunize. Okay, now you can imagine what would happen. So play through this game and see that if I immunize these 3 people, okay, actually the infection won't spread at all. Okay, so that's interesting. 3 immunizations suffice. What about 2? Who should I immunize if I had 2? So, question. Who should you immunize to minimize spread? Should you immunize randomly? Should you target your immunizations? Very interesting questions. Answering these questions, discrete math. You can see that these are all very relevant questions today. Okay. By the way, who should you immunize? If you're thinking about this, you're obviously not a politician, because I'm thinking about how to immunize people in order to minimize spread. But actually what happens in reality is the most powerful people, the most important people have to be immunized, even if immunizing someone else might have minimized spread. This is the real world. That's the real world. Okay. Next application. Speed dating. Okay. So, your daytime job is a Fox student, but in the night you run a speed dating club. Okay, so let's see what that club looks like. So we're going to build a model of your club. Wow, look at the speed at which I erase. Okay, so 16 people come. So you have 4 tables. Okay, so let me shade these tables. And if 16 people come to your club, so you have space for 16 people. If 16 people come, it means that 4 people sit at a table. So you have A, B, C, D. These are the names. I'm just labeling them. E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. So 16 people came to your speed dating club. Okay, and let's imagine that they take seats. Okay. And for reasons that will become clear later, let's call this round 1 of speed dating. Okay. Now, what we will say, now obviously people, when they speed date, they like to meet people and then see if they get along, and then shall we, go on a second date and a third date and get married and so on and so forth. Okay. So what we will say is that in this scenario, A, who is group speed dating, with B, C, and D. A meets B, C, and D. So A meets B, C, D. Similarly, B meets C, D, and A. And C meets D, A, and B. And D meets A, B, and C. Okay, so A has met these three people. Okay, and that's good. So that's 15 minutes of speed dating. And then when this round is done, you know, they all get up and move around. Okay, but you, the speed date club owner, gets to decide how people move around. In other words, you get to schedule the rounds. Okay, so question, in the next round, who should sit where? Okay, well, that depends. So that's the model. That depends. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Okay. So let us say that for your club to be profitable, you need to make people happy, and people are going to get happy if they meet as many people as possible. So you'd like in the next round, let's say, all the people to meet as many people as possible. Okay. And since you have an hour, and each round is 15 minutes of group speed dating, they chat and they figure out, you know, whether they like each other or not, and then they get up and move to the next round. So you've got round 1, round 2, round 3, and round 4. So you get to figure out who sits at what table in each round. You want people to meet as many people as possible. That's the task. It's a discrete math task. It might not look like one, but it's a discrete math task. So for example, question, is it possible? Is it possible for A to meet, you know, all 15 people? All 15 other people? Question mark. So can you carefully construct the 4 rounds so that A meets all 15 other people? So I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm just going to tell you that, you know, here's the model, speed dating club. There are lots of interesting questions that we might ask, like, you know, what if I want to maximize the number of people A meets? How do I do it? What if I want to maximize the number of people on average that someone met? So A meets 8, B meets 10, D meets 11, and so on and so forth. And I take how many people each person met and average it. So, you know, depending on what's the goal, you know, how do you do it? How do you schedule the rounds? Scheduling rounds is a very hard discrete math problem. Okay. We can solve it. And we need to solve it if you want to efficiently speed date. Okay, online advertising. Okay, this is related to another thing, which is a very important discrete math topic that's called a graph, but forget about the name for the moment. I'll just imagine that, you know, we have 6 friends. You know, in the previous example, we had 16 friends. Let's drop down to 6. So you have A, you have B, you have C, you have D, you have E, and you have F. So you have 6 friends. Okay, so we're talking about online advertising. Well, when you talk about advertising, you mean advertising to people. So imagine these are the people. Okay, now, okay, what's interesting is that, you know, some of these people are friends with some other people, and some people are not friends, let's say enemies, or they don't like each other. Okay, so let me show you who's friends with who by drawing a line between 2 people if they're friends. So boom, 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 boom. So AC are friends, AD are friends, CD are friends, and so on. Okay, so you've got a bunch of people who are friends with each other, and you've got pairs of people who are not friends with each other. Okay, now this is interesting. You might recognize, for example, you know, this group of 3 people, they're all mutual friends, and you might have called that a friendship clique or a social clique. And that's actually what we call it in computer science as well, in discrete math. Okay. Here's another social clique. Okay, 2 social cliques. Okay, and F looks like a loner. Well, you know, what can I say? F is a loner. Okay, kind of like me. Okay, so this is what we call a social network. Now, you know, you are an advertiser and you have one iPhone. Which you can give away for free. That's your mechanism for advertising. Who should you give it to? Okay, so now It depends. Depends on what's your goal. And typical goal of an advertiser is to maximize adoption. Okay, maximize the spread of usage. Okay, so you know, if you look at this graph intuitively, you might think, well, you know, let's try to make a model. A model could go something like this. You know, if you are in a clique of friends, let's say A, you know, that means you probably, you know, once a week you have dinner together, your friends. Okay, so if I give A the iPhone, my very precious free iPhone, I give it to A. Well, when A, C, and D go out for dinner together because they're a clique of friends, okay, then A, you know, gets out his iPhone to, you know, like browse the web, and then D and C look and say, oh, what is that? Oh, that's an iPhone. Oh, I got to get an iPhone. Okay, so you can think that if I give it to A, since they're a clique of friends, well, C and D will see it and then buy it. So I've managed to spread to 2. Can we do better? Okay, and looking at this graph, you might think, yeah, you know, look, you can instead give it to D. Okay, why? Because D is kind of in many social cliques, many social communities. On Monday, A, C, and D go out for dinner. D pulls out the iPhone to, you know, show off that he can check out his social media and, you know, go to the Fox webpage and stuff like that. And then A and C say, wow, you can go to the Fox webpage? I need to get an iPhone. So A and C buy the iPhone. Okay. And then on Tuesday, D goes for dinner with B and E because they are also a social clique. And then same process, B and E buy the iPhone. Okay, F, we can't reach F. Okay, too bad. Okay, so it's possible to do way better than giving the iPhone to A. Give it to D. Okay. Now, in this little baby social network, we can look at it and kind of maybe think, yeah, D is the best. But how do you do online social advertising to a social network like Facebook with a, you know, with a billion people and complex relationships? Okay, that's a discrete math problem. You know, you need to formulate it, and you need to figure out, okay, so who are the important people in the large social communities? Those are the people to advertise to. Well, what does important person mean? How do we find them? How do we make sure they're in large social communities? Okay, social communities sometimes could be called cliques. Okay, these are all discrete math problems. Okay. Once you give me the representation of friends like that and tell me what you want to do, you want to find the person who's the most important in the largest community. Discrete math problem. Okay, so that's just to show you that the dizzying array of applications to which, if you want to answer fundamental questions, you need to be well versed in discrete math. Okay, now let me get a little bit more abstract and talk about, you know, the kinds of things that we like to do in computing. Okay, so domino puzzle. You might think, domino puzzle? Yes. Why domino puzzle? Because, you know, dominoes, everyone knows what dominoes are. I could tell this puzzle to my 8-year-old daughter and she would understand it perfectly. She might even be able to solve it without any problem. Okay? So it's very easy for me to convince you, it's very easy for me to convey to you the domino puzzle. Okay? So what is the domino puzzle? Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 dominoes as an example. So I'm giving you an example of the puzzle. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 dominoes, D1, D2, and D3. 3 example dominoes. Okay, so what does a domino look like? It has 2 parts. So each of these dominoes have 2 parts. Okay, and now typically you would put a number in each part. Okay, and that's what makes a conventional domino. But since we're computer scientists, we're going to put a binary string. Okay, so a binary string in each part. So in here you've got a 0. And here you've got 1, 0, 0. And treat this as a binary string. So here you have 0, 1 and 0, 0. And here you have 1, 1, 0 and 1, 1. Okay? So you have 3 dominoes. And let us suppose that you have an unlimited supply of such dominoes. Unlimited supply. Okay? Now, the goal is to place dominoes in a sequence. So let me give you an example of a domino sequence. So consider the sequence D3, D1, D3. Okay, and I could put more dominoes if I wanted. I could put less. Okay, because remember you have an unlimited sequence of dominoes, and dominoes can repeat. Okay, so let's see what these 3 dominoes, when I put them next to each other, look like. So D3 is 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. D1 is 0, 1, 0, 0. And D3 again is 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. Okay, nice. Okay, now what I'm going to say is that when you put these three dominoes next to each other, you kind of concatenate them into one big domino. So this becomes a humongous domino, okay, where we concatenate the strings. Okay, so it becomes 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. And then this becomes 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1. Okay. So when you concatenate dominoes, you get a bigger domino where the strings, the top and bottom strings are concatenated. And let's look at what the top string here is. It starts 1, 1, this starts 1, 1. That's good. You know, they match, but then they mismatch here. 0, 1. So they mismatch. Okay, mismatch. Okay, so the goal is to find a sequence of dominoes, and you can repeat dominoes, you can use as many as you want. So the goal is to find a sequence of dominoes such that when you concatenate them, the top and bottom string match. Okay, find a sequence of dominoes so that the concatenated top and bottom strings match. Simple enough. You could tell this to your 11-year-old brother, and he'll mess around. So tinker! He'll mess around, and maybe he'll figure out that you can do it. Okay, he'll figure out a sequence that works. Or maybe he'll figure out that for these three dominoes, it's not possible. Okay, so let me give you an example of a set of dominoes for which it is clearly not possible. So if my dominoes were 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1. So if I ask you, can you concatenate dominoes so that they match, you'll immediately say, not possible. Come on, man. What domino will I start with? No matter what domino I start with, the first bit will be a 0 and the first bit here will be a 1. 0, 1, 0, 1. So I can't even get started with matching strings. Okay. So it's a non-trivial puzzle. Sometimes it might be possible, sometimes it might not be possible. But when it's possible, you should be able to find me the sequence. And so that's the computing problem. Imagine I could have given this to you as a homework problem in a programming course like data structures. Okay. So here's the input. I give you a set of dominoes, D1, D2, D3, let's say up to DK. So I have K, maybe 10, who knows, okay? I give you a set of dominoes. And I could specify the input in like an input file, okay? Where each domino is a row, and it's, like the top string, and then some separator, let's say comma, and then the bottom string. So string, comma, string, one domino. New line, string, comma, string, another domino, new line, and so on. Okay? So I can certainly give you the input as a text file, a set of dominoes. Okay? And your program needs to figure out, is it possible to find a sequence with a perfect match, top and bottom string? And if so, tell me what that sequence is. Or your program should say, it's not possible. Now, when we write programs as computer scientists, I'll just mention to you that you don't want things that infinitely loop. Okay, so your program should, once it reads this file, it should do something, stop, and output the correct answer. Okay, so that's the domino puzzle. Okay, looks like a computing problem. Let me tell you the subset sum, matching subset sum puzzle. So I'm just showing you the dizzying array of things to which we can apply discrete math, in case you've forgotten what the hell am I doing. Okay, so matching subset sums. Okay, so let's consider a set of numbers. So I'm going to consider the set of numbers 3, 7, 9, 5, 4, 10, 13, just for the hell of it. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers. Okay, nice. Okay, so we have 7 numbers in this matching in this subset. Now I'm allowed to take a group of numbers and form a second subset. So let me take a group of numbers which are going to be 7 and 5. Okay, so there's a group of numbers. And let me take another 7, 5, let me say 7, 5, 10. Okay, and let me take another group of numbers. So I've taken 7, 5, and 10. Let me consider another group of numbers, 9 and 13. Technically, these are called subsets of the original set. That's why subset sums. Okay, matching subset. That's what these are, subsets. Okay, now, why do I say, I'm going to tell you that these subsets match. Okay, and why? Because look, if I compute the sum of this subset, I get 12 plus 10, 22. Compute the sum here, I get 9 plus 13, 22. Okay, look, the sums match. So I'm going to call these matching subsets. Okay. The sum of the numbers in the two subsets match. Okay. So in this example, I played around with it to show you, what's going on. Okay. But again, we could easily formulate this as a programming homework in a data structures course, maybe even a CS1 course, which is, I give you as input a text file with a bunch of numbers. Okay. So input is a bunch of numbers. And they need not be small numbers like this. These are sort of, very tiny numbers. You could imagine that the bunch of numbers I give you, every number is a 27-digit number, so it's a huge number. Okay, so you couldn't just look at it and say, oh, that's 3. No, it's a huge 27-digit number. So I give you a bunch of numbers. Each line is a number. Could be a large number, like let's say a 27-digit number. Output should be either yes, there are matching subsets that are different. So yes, there are distinct matching subsets, in which case you can present them. You can say here, subset 1, subset 2, and look, they match. Subset 1 and subset 2. Okay, so you can present the two subsets and say, look, here I've presented for you two subsets that kind of proves, that demonstrates that there are distinct matching subsets. But it's also possible that there are no pairs of matching subsets. Okay, so the output should either be yes together with two subsets or no. Not possible. Okay, and you should feel comfortable that you could write a program that takes as input this original set of numbers and tries to answer this question. Okay, so the last two problems I showed you were just to show you that we're not restricting our study of discrete math just to situations in the real world where we build a model and then ask questions. We're also going to consider simple problems like these, which are sort of easy to understand. You don't need a model, it's just a very well-defined problem, and we can ask you to write a program to solve these problems. Okay. Now, whenever you're asked to write a program to solve the problems, it's very important to bear in mind that, now that you're taking discrete math, and after you take this course, okay, you don't just write a problem. You don't just write a program for a problem and then walk off and have a cup of coffee and tea and say, look, I'm done. No, that's not sufficient. Okay? It's necessary to also be able to demonstrate to someone else that, look, I wrote a program and I can demonstrate to you, I can prove to you that it works. Okay? And if you don't think it's a very important task to be able to prove to you that it works, just go and have a look at the Therac 25 on Wikipedia, this machine that's supposed to give radiation therapy. And the sort of like within the first few lines in Wikipedia, you'll see something to the effect of, and due to some concurrent software programming bugs, the Therac 25 occasionally gave high doses of radiation to the patients. High doses, 100 times too much, 1,000 times too much, occasionally resulting in death. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So, there's no forgiveness for that. Not when you're writing a program. There's no reason why a program should not work properly, correctly, all the time. There's no reason for it. Especially no reason for it if you are well versed in the study of discrete math and you appreciate that it is necessary to demonstrate that your program works and you do it. Okay? Because other people rely on these programs. It's in some sense our moral duty when we write a program that solves some problem to ensure that it works correctly all the time. Okay? Correctly all the time. Okay. So now let's go back to the talking head mode. I want to sort of continue that theme of how important it is to be rigorous when you program. You're not just programming to do stuff, okay? And then I want to give you a tip from George Polya, who's a great mathematician. And if great people who I'm going to invoke quotes from say things, then odds are that us lesser people should follow. Okay. Okay, so welcome back to the talking head mode, where we've just finished talking about some applications of discrete math, and when we get more into discrete math and then the theory of computing, we'll ask very deep questions. So just like we ask questions with virus spreading and speed dating and online advertising, we'll ask deep questions about computing. What can we compute? What can we not compute? How quickly can we compute the things we can compute, and so on and so forth. And you can think about these deep questions in the context of the two sort of programming assignment problems that I gave you. Okay. Now, let's sort of take a diversion. And I also mentioned that it is the responsibility of a programmer to not only make sure that their program works for the benefit of other people who are going to use it, traffic schedulers, fuel injection systems, radiation therapy machines, and so on and so forth. But it's also necessary to demonstrate that your program works. Now, I'm not the first person to say this, so here I'm going to quote from a very famous computer science personality, and the first quote that I'm gonna literally just read out is, "Too few people recognize that this high technology so celebrated today is essentially a mathematical technology." Okay, now yes, we build a computer, it's hardware, it's got plastic, it's got a semiconductor chip and this and that and wires. Okay, yes, that's just the object itself. But its inner workings, it's essentially a mathematical device. Okay? And we will build a very accurate and complete, in some sense, model of that computer when we come to answer what can we compute and what can we not compute. Okay, so it's a mathematical device. And what's a program? A program is implementing an algorithm, a sequence of steps that occur one by one. Okay, and that is in some sense a mathematical object, an algorithm. Okay, so a computer is essentially, this high technology is a mathematical device, and when we solve problems with this mathematical device, we're essentially performing a mathematical task. We're writing a program to solve a problem. Okay, and when you write, so what does this guy say? He says, this is Dijkstra, a famous computer scientist who has algorithms named after him. Okay, what does he say? He says that when you program something, you must demonstrate that your program works. You must demonstrate that it has the required properties. And if you only think about this at the very end, let me just program it now and then I'll prove it later that it works, or I'll leave it to someone else to prove. If that's the way you approach this, then it's never going to happen. Because the only way in which you'll be able to demonstrate that your program works is if, while you're implementing, while you're programming, you have it in mind that you're going to have to prove that it works. And so you program in such a way that it's going to be easy to prove that your program works. For example, you'll program in a modular way with what are called preconditions and what are called postconditions. And it's only when you program in this very rigorous way that you'll be able to prove that your program works, that you'll be able to satisfy this obligation. It's not a desire. It's an obligation of a programmer to show that their program works, to demonstrate it. Okay? And how do we demonstrate that a program works? Well, that's another interesting side of discrete math. So what I just showed you is that we use discrete math in order to formulate, to model, and then solve real-world problems. But then, once we solve the real-world problems, we program it, and now we need to demonstrate that the program works. And the reasoning that you need to demonstrate that a program works is pretty formal. So here comes discrete math again. So not only do you need to know discrete math to solve a problem and then program it in as an algorithm, but then you also need to know discrete math in order to prove that your program works. So there's discrete math everywhere. Okay. Now, he goes on to say that, as long as people don't take this view of programming, okay, that it's a mathematical task, and when you write a program, for example, a module for a program, you must have explicit preconditions and postconditions and prove that if your input satisfies the preconditions, then your output satisfies the postconditions, and so on and so forth. If you don't take this approach, we have a software crisis. We will continue to put out software that, like the Therac 25, will, really? We put out an excessive dose of radium? Well, I didn't know that it was going to do that. Otherwise, of course, I wouldn't have given it to the patient. Well, you didn't know it's going to do that because whoever implemented that system didn't demonstrate that it was safe. Demonstrate without any doubt that it was safe. And the only way that we know to demonstrate things without any doubt is through the concept of proof. Okay? And Dijkstra goes on to say that, as long as we have this software crisis, you're going to get quacks and charlatans coming in with all kinds of, weird therapies and this and that, and sometimes they call themselves software engineering gurus. Watch out for the software engineering guru who is not going to demonstrate the validity of his solution. Okay. So that's just to show you that very many famous people, and I'll tell you, this guy was a mathematician and this guy was a fantastic programmer. And even if he doesn't know anything about my problem, I'll have this guy program it for me because I know this guy will ensure that whatever he puts out works. So I hope that, in your career, whatever you put out, you must make sure it works. Okay? It's a mathematical adventure to write a program and make sure that it works. Okay, now, since we're talking about discrete math is hard. I've already told you, you cannot be a spectator in discrete math. It's not a spectator sport. You must get down and dirty into the weeds. In discrete math, if you're missing anything, you're missing everything. So you're reading and you're confused about something. Figure it out. Come to me. Figure it out. Go to the TA. Figure it out. Okay, because that's the nature of math. Okay. And sometimes when you're faced with a problem, you have to be patient. You have to try things. You have to vary the things you try. Okay? And here's a quote from George Polya, a great mathematician. Okay? Think of a mouse who's in an old-fashioned cage with bars. Okay? And after many futile attempts, banging, bouncing, thumping his body against the bars in the cage, try this, try that, try this, try that, hammering my shoulder, hammering my leg, and then finally I find a small opening. The bars are slightly wider apart. Okay? But nevertheless, they're wide enough for me to go through, and now I'm bruised, I'm battered, but I escape through this small opening, and I find freedom. Okay? Now that's what a math problem, or in general, any kind of problem can do. They can enclose you in a cage. You feel lost. Okay? Okay? So you have to try things. We call that tinkering. You have to get down and dirty. You can't just look at a problem and say, oh, that's hard, and then hope that, oh, some magical solution will come to you. And if it doesn't, oh, throw your hands up in the air and walk off. No, that's not the way we do math. The way we do math, even when we're reading math, you have a pencil and you're working out things and making sure you understand everything. Then when you have a problem, you sit down, you focus, okay? You're patient, you persevere, you try this, you try that. I mean, imagine if Christopher Columbus came halfway across the ocean and said, oh man, this is a tough trek I've got, I'm going to turn around, okay? You've got to persevere, okay? And so I'm going to show you a problem here. It's a very simple problem. Just, it's not hard to understand, but it emphasizes the need to persevere. So you have got, a box in which there are 6 tiles, 2 of each color. So blue, red and green. Okay, and the idea is you can connect these tiles of the same color with wires. The wires can, bend and so on and so forth. So the goal is to connect the same color tiles with wires. The wire cannot leave the box, cannot enter tiles except for the 2 tiles that it's connecting, and they cannot cross. And then the question is, can it be done? Can you figure out a way to connect the wires? Okay, now I would say just sit and think about this problem. Try this, try that. First consider the situation. Is it possible? Try this, try that. Maybe you fail. Is it not possible? Try to see if you can convince yourself that it's not possible. Try both conclusions. Don't give up, persevere. Sit tight and wait for a good idea. Okay? And after some time, hopefully you will see one of the solutions. Okay? If not, afterwards you can look at the solution online, okay, in the solution manual. Okay? But this is just, and show this problem to anyone, your best mathematician friend. They'll have to think about it. They'll try this, they'll try that. So you see, this is the way math is. Okay? Anybody has to sit and think about something. It's not obvious. And you can't just give up you can't just give up the whole plot because you don't see the answer immediately. Tinker, try. Okay? Get into the weeds. Okay, so let me summarize by showing you the workflow of a typical discrete math guy. And we saw that in some sense in the problems we discussed. A typical discrete math guy, approaching a problem. The first thing you do is model it. For example, in the virus game, we said that people are squares on a grid, and if 2 of your neighbors are infected, you get infected. So you model the problem. Okay. Now you might think, after modeling the problem, let me solve it. No, you don't solve it. You first go and tinker with easy cases and see if you can understand what's going on. We did exactly that with the virus. Okay, we said, okay, so here are 6 infections. Let's see what happens. In doing that, we sort of build a familiarity with what's going on. We might start seeing things that we can claim. For example, in that example, not everyone gets infected. Okay, and we might ask questions like, how many people are needed to be infected at the beginning to infect everyone? So based on this tinkering with easy cases, now you can sort of build an understanding of the problem. You can now start asking questions, and these questions usually turn into what are called conjectures. So for example, in the virus spreading example, what's the minimum number of infections needed to infect that 7 by 7 grid? And then I conjectured that it was 7. Okay, and now I need to prove that. I need to prove my conjecture. Okay, and when I've proved it, I now know something new that I can go and tell the epidemiologist. Look, for that model of virus spreading you gave me in this population of 550,000 people, only 33% get infected. Okay, or you need at least 8% to infect everyone. These are interesting now theorems that you can prove. Okay, but the first step, the tinkering step, is what I want to focus on. Tinker, because usually, that's what differentiates the professional from the amateur. The amateur writes down the same model as the professional and looks at it. I don't see what to do. Okay. The professional writes down the same model but does not look at it and say, I don't see what to do. Says, let me take a simple case and see what's going on. Okay, from the simple case, maybe a slightly more complex case. Okay, and now you kind of build a pattern. You see a pattern and you say, oh, I see that this pattern is occurring. Oh, then I'll conjecture that pattern and then I'll prove it. Okay, that's the expert. The amateur writes down the model, stares at it, stares at it, stares at it, stares at it, stares at it. No immediate answer popping into the head, no immediate question popping into the head, walks off and goes for a swim. Okay. All right, and I want to end by putting my money where my mouth is. Okay. So, $10 challenge problem. You know, construct for me a math cartoon. It has to be your own. Okay. And I'll take all those that I get, and the best one I will give the $10 prize to. And you know, of course, if you submit one, it's you know, I can put it on this website. Okay. Challenge problem number 2 is exactly the subset sum problem. Okay, but instead of that small list with 7 numbers, I have on the website, you know, a gigantic list of 100 numbers. Okay, and these numbers are big numbers. Okay, 27-digit numbers. And so your task is, for this subset, can you find 2 distinct collections of numbers that match? I.e., when you add up the numbers in your 2 sets, they match. Okay, so that's the $100 prize. I'm optimistic. In fact, I hope that someone wins this $100 prize. It's well within your reach. Okay, but now comes the $1,000 prize. Now comes the $1,000 prize. Now the $1,000 prize, you know, you've got to think, this guy Malik, he's no dodo. He's not going to just give away $1,000 like that. So he's probably protected himself somehow. So you can assume that this problem is not trivial. Okay? And I wouldn't even touch this problem unless you got a good handle on the $100 prize. So the $1,000 prize is the domino problem. Okay? But not for this specific set of dominoes, but to write the actual program. So that's the difference between the subset sum problem and the domino problem. In the subset sum problem, I give you a specific set and I ask you, can you find 2 matching subsets? In the domino problem, you have to write a program that can take as input the set of dominoes, just like we discussed, and the output is yes or no. Okay? The output is yes if I can get a sequence of dominoes for which the top and bottom string match, and the output is and then you of course can show me the sequence, and the output should be no if it's not possible. Not possible doesn't mean I didn't find it. Not possible means nobody can find it. Not possible. Okay. And of course, when you write a program, please don't come to me with a program that can infinitely loop. I'm not interested in those kinds of programs. Okay. So there you have it, and I'll see you next lecture.